It was like watching a tiny, perpetually grinning enigma swim in circles, and I was completely hooked. But little did I know, that initial fascination was just the shallow end of a very deep, very strange pool. Okay, so you think you know axolotls, right? Cute little amphibian, perpetually smiling, regenerates limbs. Basically, a real-life Pokemon. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about axolotls is just the tip of the iceberg? What if I told you that there was something of just about my axolotl newt, and that offness spiraled into a series of increasingly bizarre events that made me question everything I thought I knew about science, nature, and maybe even reality itself? It all started subtly. I mean, newt was always a bit different, even for an axolotl. They're known for being relatively docile, content to just float around and occasionally snap at a passing bloodworm. Newt, on the other hand, was inquisitive, almost unnervingly so. He would follow my movements around the room, his little black eyes fixated on me. At first, I thought it was just because he associated me with food, but then he started reacting to things that had nothing to do with feeding time. Like, I'd be watching TV and he'd suddenly dart to the front of the tank when a specific actor came on screen. Or I'd be listening to music and he'd start doing this weird little dance whenever a certain song played. It was like he was understanding things, picking up on nuances that I didn't think an amphibian brain was capable of processing. Then there was the staring. Oh, the staring. Axolotls don't really blink, you know? They just stare. But Newt's staring was different. It wasn't the blank, unseeing stare of a fish. It felt knowing, like he was looking into me, trying to decipher something. It got to the point where I'd avoid looking at him directly. It was just too unsettling. And then came the noises. Axolotls are generally silent creatures. They don't bark, meow, or even croak. But Newt, he started making noises. At first, it was just faint clicking sounds. I thought it was the filter or maybe some air bubbles in the tank. But then the clicks became more distinct, more rhythmic. And then they started to sound like words. Not clear, understandable words, mind you. More like garbled underwater whispers. But there was definitely a pattern to them, a structure. I tried recording them, analyzing them, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was like he was speaking a language that my ears just weren't equipped to understand. Of course, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled it. Axolotl making strange noises. Axolotl acting weird. Is my axolotl possessed? The results were less than helpful. Mostly just forum posts from people asking similar questions, followed by responses like, "Your axolotl is probably just stressed," or "Maybe you should clean the tank." Thanks, Internet. Very insightful. So I went to the experts. I called the local aquarium, the herpetology department at the university, even a couple of exotic pet vets. Everyone gave me the same answer. Axolotls don't make noises. They're amphibians. They're silent. I started to feel like I was going crazy. Was I imagining things? Was I just projecting my own anxieties onto my innocent little axolotl? But then things escalated. The noises became louder, more frequent. The staring became more intense. And then he started changing. It started with his gills. Axolotls have these feathery external gills that stick out from the sides of their heads. They're one of their most distinctive features. Newt's gills started to change color. They went from a healthy, vibrant pink to a dull, almost grayish hue, and they started to shrink, like they were withering away. I panicked. I thought he was sick. I rushed him to the vet, the exotic pet vet who specialized in amphibians. He examined Newt, ran some tests, and came back with a perplexed look on his face. "I don't understand," he said. "He's perfectly healthy. All his vitals are normal. But his gills, they're definitely atrophying. It's like he's adapting to breathe air." Adapting to breathe air? But axolotls are fully aquatic. They can't breathe air. That's like saying a fish is learning to fly. It made no sense. I took Newt home, feeling more confused and concerned than ever. I watched him closely, expecting him to start gasping for air or showing other signs of distress. But he didn't. He just continued to swim around, stare at me, and make those strange clicking noises. And then, one morning, I woke up and found him out of the tank. Not completely out, mind you. He was still partially submerged, lying on the edge of the tank with his head and shoulders resting on the glass. But he was out of the water. And he was breathing. Not gasping, not struggling, but actually breathing. Taking slow, deliberate breaths. His gills were almost completely gone by this point. Just tiny little knobs on the sides of his head. And his skin, it was changing too. It was becoming thicker, drier, more amphibian-like. Less like an axolotl and more like a salamander. That's when I knew that something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just a sick axolotl. This wasn't just a weird axolotl. This was something else. Something that defied explanation. Something that made me question everything I thought I knew about the natural world. Something that was about to turn my life upside down. Because what happened next, well, let's just say it involved a mysterious symbol, a hidden chamber, and a secret that had been buried for centuries. And it all started with a little axolotl named Newt, who was anything but normal. It was like watching a tiny, perpetually grinning enigma swim in circles, and I was completely hooked. But little did I know that initial fascination was just the shallow end of a very deep, very strange pool. A pool that was about to drag me down into its murky depths. I started documenting everything. Every feeding, every water change, every strange little twitch of Newt's gills. I became obsessed with understanding what made him so different. One afternoon, while meticulously cleaning his tank, I noticed something odd. A faint marking, barely visible on the underside of one of the decorative rocks. It looked like a circle, with a small stylized trident inside. Dismissing it as just a natural formation, I almost scrubbed it away. Scrubbed. But something held me back. An instinct, a whisper in the back of my mind telling me to pay attention. I took the rock out, examined it closely under a magnifying glass. The symbol was definitely deliberate, etched into the stone with precision. It wasn't natural. Where had this rock come from? I remembered buying it from a small, dusty aquarium shop downtown, a place I'd only stumbled upon by accident. The owner, a wizened old man with eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets, hadn't said much, just mumbled something about quote 1 and quote 2. I'd brushed it off as eccentric shopkeeper banter. Now, I wasn't so sure. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, I decided to revisit the shop. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, the familiar musty smell of fish food and stagnant water filling my nostrils. The old man was behind the counter, polishing a piece of driftwood with a slow, deliberate motion. He said, his voice raspy. I replied, trying to sound casual, my eyes darting around the dimly lit space. I wanted to play it cool, to not reveal how much that cryptic comment had burrowed its way into my brain. The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Quote 7. He set down the driftwood and leaned forward, his eyes glinting behind his thick glasses. Quote, at ye hear that, what? I decided to bite. Quote, 9. He stroked his chin, considering. Quote, 10. Okay, now he was just messing with me. Dinosaurs? I raised an eyebrow, trying to convey my skepticism. Quote, 11. He smiled, a knowing, unsettling smile. Quote, 12. He paused for effect, his gaze intense. On that, quote, 13. I did know that, actually. It was one of the coolest things about them. Quote, quote, 15. He echoed. Quote, 16. He was losing me again. Intentional? Was he suggesting some kind of axolotl conspiracy? I decided to steer the conversation back to the original weirdness. Quote, 17. The old man sighed as if he'd been expecting this question. He reached under the counter and pulled out a dusty, leather-bound book. It looked incredibly old, the pages yellowed and brittle. This, he said, holding it out to me, is a collection of folklore, legends passed down through generations, stories about creatures that dwell in the hidden places of the world. I hesitated, then took the book. The leather felt dry and cracked in my hands. The title was barely legible, but I could make out a few words. Of the lake and the salamander. Lake Xochimilco, the old man said, seeing my confusion. The only place in the world where axolotls still thrive in the wild. According to these stories, the axolotls are not merely amphibians, they are guardians, protectors of something ancient and powerful that lies beneath the surface of the lake. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the faded text. The language was archaic, filled with strange symbols and unfamiliar words. I could make out fragments of stories about underwater temples, shimmering scales, and creatures that could control the very flow of water. It was all incredibly fantastical, like something out of a fairy tale. I don't know, I said, handing the book back to him. This seems a bit far-fetched. He shrugged. Believe what you will, but I've seen things, my boy. Things that can't be explained by science. Things that make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. He walked over to the tank containing my axolotl and tapped on the glass. The axolotl, as if on cue, swam to the front and stared back at us with its perpetually smiling face. Look at him, the old man said. So innocent, so harmless. But don't be fooled. There's more to him than meets the eye. I stared at the axolotl, trying to see it in a new light. Was it really just a cute, gilled amphibian? Or was it something more, a guardian, a protector, a living relic of a forgotten age? The old man's words echoed in my mind. Quote, 28. Quote, what secrets did this little creature hold? And what role was I, an ordinary guy with an ordinary aquarium, about to play in uncovering them? I thanked the old man for his time and left the shop. The leather-bound book's images still burned into my mind. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter. The air felt a little crisper, as if the world itself had shifted slightly on its axis. Back home, I found myself staring at the axolotl's tank, my mind racing. The old man's stories, the strange symbols in the book, the axolotl's unsettling gaze. It was all starting to feel like more than just a coincidence. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what was really going on. I decided to do some research. I spent hours online poring over articles about axolotls, Lake Xochimilco, and ancient Mexican mythology. I learned about the Aztec god Xolotl, who was said to have transformed himself into an axolotl to avoid being sacrificed. I learned about the chinampas, the floating gardens that have been cultivated in the lake for centuries. And I learned about the threats facing the axolotl population, from pollution to habitat loss. But none of it seemed to connect to the old man's stories. None of it explained the axolotl's strange behavior, its apparent intelligence, or the feeling I had that it was somehow different. Frustrated, I decided to take a break. I went outside for a walk, hoping to clear my head. As I strolled through the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a movement, a flicker of light. It was probably just my imagination, but it made me uneasy. When I got back home, I found something strange waiting for me. A small, intricately carved wooden box was sitting on my doorstep. There was no note, no return address, nothing to indicate who had left it there. I hesitated before picking it up. Was this some kind of prank? A threat? Or was it something else entirely? Carefully, I opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft velvet, was a single, shimmering scale. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, iridescent and luminous, as if it were radiating its own light. It looked like it belonged well, to something not of this world. And then I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that whatever was happening, it was far bigger and far stranger than I could have ever imagined. This was no longer just about a peculiar pet. This was about something ancient, something powerful, and something that was now undeniably involving me. I carefully picked up the scale, turning it over in my fingers. The light danced across its surface, revealing patterns that seemed to shift and change with every movement. It felt strangely warm to the touch, almost alive. A faint hum resonated from it, a subtle vibration that tickled my palm. What was I supposed to do with this? Was it a clue, a warning, or some kind of invitation? Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Dr. Albright. "Meet me at the lab. Urgent. Bring the scale." That was it. No explanation, just a terse command. I didn't like being ordered around, but I knew I had no choice. Whatever Dr. Albright was up to, she clearly knew more than she was letting on. And the scale was the key. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, the shimmering scale clutched tightly in my hand. The drive to the lab felt longer than usual, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. What secrets was Dr. Albright hiding? What was so special about this axolotl? And what role was I, the hapless pet store employee, playing in all of this? The lab was eerily quiet when I arrived, the usual hum of equipment replaced by an unsettling silence. Dr. Albright was nowhere to be seen. A note lay on her desk, scrawled in her familiar, hurried handwriting. Quote, 30, quote, 31. I muttered to myself, my anxiety spiking. No, Dr. Albright, I absolutely do not know what to look for. I'm a pet store employee, not a geneticist. I mean, I aced biology in high school, but that was like a decade ago. And even then, my understanding of genetic markers was limited to Punnett squares and fruit flies. I stared at the scale, its iridescent surface shimmering under the lab lights. It looked alien. Not in a sci-fi little green men kind of way, but in a fundamentally, biologically different kind of way. It was like looking at something that shouldn't exist, something that defied the natural order. With a sigh, I resigned myself to my task. I mean, what choice did I have? Dr. Albright clearly wasn't going to provide any guidance, and I was too curious, and, let's be honest, too scared to just walk away. I spent the next few hours fumbling through the lab equipment, my fingers clumsy and uncertain. I managed to locate the genetic sequencing machine, a behemoth of chrome and wires that looked like it belonged on the set of a science fiction movie. After what felt like an eternity of trial and error, I finally managed to get the machine running, the scale carefully placed inside. The machine whirred and beeped, its digital display flashing a dizzying array of numbers and symbols. I watched, mesmerized, as the genetic code of the axolotl scale slowly unfolded before my eyes. At first, it seemed like gibberish, a random jumble of R's, T's, C's, and G's. But then, as I scrolled further down the sequence, something caught my eye. A pattern, a repeating sequence of genetic markers that seemed out of place. It was like finding a line of code from a completely different program embedded in the middle of a complex software system. It shouldn't be there. It didn't belong. I cross-referenced the sequence with every genetic database I could find, searching for a match, a clue, anything that could explain what I was seeing. But nothing came up. The sequence was completely unique, unlike anything ever recorded. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. This was the secret Dr. Albright was hiding. This was the reason the axolotl was so special. But what did it mean? As I delved deeper into the genetic code, I discovered something even more unsettling. The repeating sequence wasn't just out of place, it was active. It was changing, evolving, right before my eyes. The genetic markers were shifting, rearranging themselves into new and unpredictable patterns. It was like watching a living, breathing organism rewriting its own DNA. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't just a strange axolotl. This was something else, something unnatural, something potentially dangerous. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the lab into near darkness. The genetic sequencing machine sputtered and died, its digital display going blank. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and louder until it vibrated through my bones. I spun around, my eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the noise. And then I saw it. The axolotl tank. The water was glowing with an eerie green light. The axolotl was no longer swimming peacefully in its little castle. It was floating in the center of the tank, its gills pulsing rhythmically, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. And then it spoke. "You know too much," it said, its voice a distorted, garbled whisper that seemed to echo inside my head. "The secrets of the deep are not meant for surface dwellers." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. An axolotl, talking. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. But the axolotl was still talking, its voice growing stronger, more confident. Quote 34. The water in the tank began to bubble and churn. The axolotl grew larger, its body elongating, its features becoming more grotesque. Its gills transformed into feathery tendrils that reached out towards me, grasping, probing. I screamed, a primal sound of terror that echoed through the empty lab. I turned and ran, desperate to escape the horrifying creature that was now emerging from the tank. As I fled, I heard the axolotl's voice again, closer this time, more menacing. "There is no escape. You are already part of the deep." I burst out of the lab, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, desperate to get away from this nightmare. As I drove away, I glanced back at the lab. The lights were still flickering, the building casting an ominous shadow against the night sky. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that my life would never be the same. I had stumbled upon something that was far beyond my comprehension, something that had irrevocably changed me, and I had a feeling that the axolotl, or whatever it was, wouldn't let me go so easily. The secrets of the deep had been revealed, and I was now caught in its current, dragged down into the unknown depths. The scale was just the beginning. I had to find Dr. Albright. She was the only one who could explain what was happening, the only one who could help me understand the horror I had unleashed. But where was she? And what was she hiding? The answers I knew were out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. But finding them might just cost me everything. The axolotl's words echoed in my mind. Quote 36, and I knew, with a growing sense of dread, that it was right. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back now. My apartment felt alien, tainted by the creature's presence. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creak of the floorboards screamed of unseen eyes. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through my contacts. Dr. Albright's number was there, a lifeline in this ocean of madness. I pressed call, holding my breath as the phone rang. And rang. And rang. No answer. Panic began to set in, cold and sharp. Where could she be? I decided to try her lab. Maybe she was working late, oblivious to the changes. I grabbed my keys and practically ran out of the apartment. The image of the shimmering scale burned into my mind. The drive to the university was a blur, the city lights seeming distorted and menacing. Every car that passed felt like it was following me, every pedestrian a potential threat. Paranoia had taken root, fed by the axolotl's cryptic words. The university was eerily silent, the empty hallways echoing with my footsteps. The air was thick with the smell of formaldehyde and something else, something vaguely aquatic, like a stagnant pond. Doctor Albright's lab was locked, the door a cold, impassive barrier. I pounded on it, shouting her name, but only silence answered. Frustration mounting, I tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. I glanced around nervously, then reached into my pocket and pulled out a small lock-picking kit I'd acquired a while back. Hey, you never know when you might need to open a stubborn pickle jar, right? It took me a few tense minutes, my hands slick with sweat, but finally the lock clicked open. I pushed the door open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The lab was dark, the only light filtering in from the hallway behind me. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the familiar shapes of lab equipment, some microscopes, centrifuges, rows of beakers and test tubes. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The room was in disarray. Papers scattered across the floor, equipment overturned. It looked like a struggle had taken place. And then I saw it, a large, empty tank. The glass shattered, shards glinting ominously on the floor. The tank that had housed something far more significant than a regular axolotl. A wave of nausea washed over me as the pieces started to fall into place. The cryptic warnings, the secret lab, the missing axolotl, the shattered tank. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Whatever that axolotl was, it was now loose, and if Dr. Albright's warnings were anything to go by, it was incredibly dangerous. I cautiously stepped further into the lab, my eyes scanning the room, searching for any sign of Dr. Albright or the thing that had escaped. I noticed a small, crumpled piece of paper on the floor near the broken tank. I picked it up, my hands trembling, and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, barely legible, but I could make out a few words. Containment, breached, evolving, unstoppable. My blood ran cold. Evolving? What did that even mean? Was it growing? Changing? Becoming more powerful? The implications were horrifying. I had to find Dr. Albright. She was the only one who knew anything about this creature, the only one who might have a chance of stopping it. I searched the lab frantically, calling out Dr. Albright's name, but there was no response. I checked the other rooms in the lab, each one more disturbing than the last. One room was filled with rows of tanks, each containing strange, mutated creatures, deformed fish, grotesque amphibians, things that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. It was like a twisted menagerie of genetic experiments gone wrong. I stumbled upon Dr. Albright's office. It was a small, cluttered space filled with books and papers. Her computer was on, the screen displaying a complex genetic sequence. I noticed a file labeled Project Chimera. I clicked on it, and a document opened detailing the experiments she had been conducting on the axolotl. The document revealed the horrifying truth. What doesn't hurt thee? The axolotl wasn't just a regular amphibian. It was a genetically engineered organism, a hybrid of multiple species designed to possess extraordinary regenerative abilities. But the experiments had gone further than just regeneration. Dr. Albright had been trying to unlock the axolotl's potential for rapid evolution to accelerate its natural adaptive abilities. And now it had escaped. And according to her notes, it was already evolving at an alarming rate, adapting to its environment, becoming stronger, more intelligent. The implications were catastrophic. If it continued to evolve unchecked, there was no telling what it could become. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a faint clicking sound coming from the hallway outside the office. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly reached for the nearest weapon, a heavy metal wrench lying on Dr. Albright's desk. I gripped it tightly, my knuckles white, and held my breath. The clicking sound grew louder, closer. Then I saw it. A shadow flickered across the doorway. I braced myself, ready to strike. And then it stepped into the room. It wasn't the axolotl. It was Dr. Albright. But she was different. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, her skin pale and clammy. She was clutching her arm, which was covered in blood, and she was muttering something under her breath, something I couldn't quite make out. I said, my voice trembling. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror. Quote, 42, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Quote, 43. Quote, 44, I said. Quote, 45. She shook her head, her eyes darting around the room. Quote, 46, she said. Quote, 47. Quote, 48, I pleaded. Quote, 49. She hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Quote, 50, she said. Quote, 51. Quote, 52, I said. Quote, 53. She nodded slowly. Quote, 54, she said. Quote, 55. Quote, 56. I asked. She looked at me, her eyes filled with dread. Quote, 57, she said. Quote, 58. My stomach churned. Offspring. How was that even possible? This was getting worse and worse. We cautiously made our way back to the main lab, our hearts pounding in our chests. The lab was even more chaotic than before. Equipment was smashed, wires were sparking, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone. And then we saw it. In the center of the room, surrounded by a swirling vortex of energy, was the axolotl. But it was no longer the cute, grinning creature I had seen in the pet store. It was huge, grotesque, a nightmarish fusion of amphibian and something else. Something alien. Its skin was covered in glistening scales, its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. And around it, swarming like insects, were dozens of smaller versions of itself, miniature monstrosities, each one as terrifying as the original. Quote, 59, I whispered. Quote, 60. Dr. Albright shook her head. Quote, 61, she said. Quote, 62. We crept forward slowly, trying to avoid the gaze of the creatures. But it was no use. They sensed us, their eyes locking onto us with predatory hunger. They lunged, their claws and teeth bared. We fought back with everything we had. I swung the wrench, smashing the creatures aside. Dr. Albright fired a taser, momentarily stunning them. But there were too many. They kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. We were losing ground, being pushed back towards the entrance. I knew we couldn't hold out much longer. Go, Dr. Albright shouted. Get to the vault. I'll hold them off. No, I protested. I'm not leaving you. Go, she screamed. This is our only chance. Reluctantly, I turned and ran towards the vault, dodging and weaving through the swarm of creatures. I reached the vault door and frantically started punching in the code. But my hands were shaking so badly I kept making mistakes. The creatures were closing in, their hissing and snapping filling the air. I could feel their hot breath on my neck. Finally, the vault door clicked open. I stumbled inside and slammed the door shut just as the creatures reached me. I could hear them pounding on the door, their claws scratching at the metal. I turned and saw the genetic inhibitor, a small vial filled with a glowing blue liquid. I grabbed it and ran back to the lab, back to Dr. Albright. I burst through the door and saw Dr. Albright surrounded by the creatures, her face covered in blood, her clothes torn. She was barely holding on. "I have it," I shouted, holding up the vial. Dr. Albright looked at me, her eyes filled with relief. "Inject it," she gasped. "Inject it into the Alpha. It's the only way." I knew what I had to do. I charged towards the Alpha Axolotl, dodging the creatures that tried to stop me. I reached the Alpha and plunged the needle into